Wow, what a year it has been. Comfort, pain, good, bad, normal, new normal. This past year, we've all been trying to get back into the swing of things, to shift back into gear. We've all been trying to be active FFA members, to be active members of our community, and to grow as leaders. It hasn't been easy. Many of you have probably never been to an in-person state convention before. Many of you just experienced your first in-person FFA event earlier this year. Jumping back into in-person events, in-person classes, and in-person conversations has not been easy for any of us. When I was younger, I had issues talking with just about anybody. I was a very shy kid. I never liked to put myself out there, and you were incredibly lucky if I ever made eye contact with you. Enter my dad. Throughout my childhood, he would always tell me, "Eye contact," whenever I talked to anybody. It used to drive me nuts because he would interrupt me in the middle of my quiet conversation facing the ground and yell at me to look into the person's eyes. Eventually, it drove me nuts to the point where it became natural because I got tired of hearing it. Now the only issue was getting me to approach people by myself. I had just gotten the hang of making eye contact with people, but I still had no clue how to go up to somebody. People are scary. I always had a lot of questions when I was younger. I always wanted to go to do things, to get out there, to see the world. But since I was a shy kid, I would always ask my dad to ask people questions for me. Finally, one day, he got tired of asking all of my questions and he looked at me and he said, "You ask them." I thought he had gone mad. Surely he did not want me to go up to this potential axe murderer and ask my question. Why on earth would he put me in such danger? I looked at him for a moment, not willing to do it, and he looked back at me and said, "The worst anyone can ever do is say no." What a weird thought. The worst anyone could ever do is say no. So I eventually gained up my confidence and I started asking questions for myself. I have not shut up since. But why was I afraid of no? It's just one small world that means we can't do something at that time. I think everyone is afraid of the word no. It's not that bad. It's not going to hurt you. So why the fear to begin with? Why have we been afraid of no since the beginning of our lives? Think back to a time when you did not ask a question, when you did not ask for something, when you did not go for something because you were afraid of the response. Now imagine if you were never afraid of that answer. What could you have accomplished? Well, if the answer was no, then you'd move on, but what if the answer was yes? You could have won that award. You could have served in that position, gotten into that club, all because you decided to ask. Now we fast forward to fairly present times. Last year, more specifically. My grandpa and grandma lived above my garage. My grandpa turned 91 last February. And at that age, my grandma was very, very afraid of leaving him home alone. Whenever she was even asked if she wanted to leave the house, her first question was, "Well, who's going to watch Grandpa?" Finally, we figured out it's time to get Grandma out of the house, so I volunteered to watch Grandpa. Wasn't really that hard of a task anyway. He was funny, sarcastic, and had a lot of stories to tell. The only thing about Grandpa is that he hated when people went out of their way for him. So when Grandma left, I went upstairs to hang out with Grandpa, and at first he tried to convince me that I did not need to be there. He did not seem to understand that if Grandma came home and found me not there, I would have been torn apart. So I hung out with him and we talked about everything under the sun. He shared stories, he shared some of his corny jokes, and eventually he went to take his midday nap. I knew Grandma wanted me up there the entire time. But as Grandpa scooted towards his beloved napping recliner, he looked back at me and said, "You don't have to stay up here while I'm sleeping." I understood where he was coming from. It's creepy having someone watch you sleep. But I was reluctant. I did not want Grandma to come home and find me not up there. So I explained this to Grandpa, and he looked at me as he was reclining and just said, "Go." I reluctantly agreed, because he did make some fair points. So I went downstairs for a bit while he took his nap, and I went back up later at the end of his usual napping session. I ended up getting some things done while I was away and actually felt somewhat accomplished that day. And I'm glad I listened to Grandpa, even if it was just for a short time. Fast forward a couple of months to Thanksgiving week. The week of Thanksgiving, the state officers had planned a bunch of chapter visits. To finally get out and meet some members, I signed up for several of them. I, of course, told my grandpa about this, and he was super supportive of everything I did, and he wanted to hear all about it afterwards. Unfortunately, he passed away Monday of Thanksgiving week at 4:15 in the morning, with my parents, my grandma, and myself all around him in the hospital. 2 hours later, I was supposed to pick up our state president, Matthew, and go to the Wamogo FFA chapter. For a little while, I considered calling Matt and telling them that I just couldn't do it today. Then I heard it in my head, clear as day, as if Grandpa was standing right next to me. Go. I decided that I should listen to Grandpa. I gathered as many marbles as I could, took a shower, and went to pick up Matt. We went to Wamogo, had an amazing visit, ran a killer workshop, and had enough time to go visit the Housatonic FFA chapter afterwards with Hannah and Taryn. It was one of the highlights of my FFA career, even though the biggest loss in my life came just hours before. Who knew one 2-letter word could have such an amazing impact? It just goes to show that you need to cherish every moment you have and listen. You never know when some of the best advice is going to pop out. FFA members, I know it's a scary world. I know that it can feel terrifying to put yourself out there. But I want each and every one of you to go. I want each and every one of you to ask those hard questions, to run for that position, to go for that award, because the most anyone can ever do is say no, but you will never be certain of what they will say unless you first go.